Ladies and gentlemen, kicking off the first stop on his world tour, our new president and prophet, Russell M. Nelson! You say you want some revelation, well, here you go.
Greetings, brothers and sisters. Welcome to the weekly Mormon News Roundup. I'm your humble host, D-Bays, which is talent on loan from Kolob. My crew and I, we ruminate weekly on the great and spacious beehive, so thanks so much for joining us to discuss the current events in Mormondom. This is episode 101, and it's January 7th, 2024. The LDS Church has some New Year's resolutions, which we're going to talk about. The Mormon shrivel appears to have been confirmed in a very important study, which has just recently been published. And finally, a Latter-day Saint congregation has been poisoned. We're going to bring you that and much, much more. And I'm joined by my fabulous co-host, Rebecca Biblioteca. How's it going, Rebecca?
It's going great. How are you this morning? 2024.
Hey, another day older and deeper in debt, as they say.
Excellent.
How was the reaction to our top 10 Mormon stories that happened last week that we recorded?
Oh, I think people really, really liked it. I had a lot of fun recording it and preparing for it. And I think once it aired, people were like, oh, yeah. And when you see the year, an amalgam of the entire year, you're like, oh, my God, it's crazy.
Yeah, we did get a shout out from Sandra Tanner, who endorsed our episode. And she said that was the definitive Mormon episode for the entire year, which if you had asked me 25 years ago whether Sandra Tanner would even know of my existence, I would have told you the answer would have been no. I'm riding on your inspired coattails once again, and I will continue to do so for the foreseeable future.
I'm just excited to start 2024 because if it's anything like 2023, we're going to have a lot to talk about for the next 12 months.
Yeah, and we're actually starting off with an absolutely enormous article that started right off the bat here, and it's from the Salt Lake Tribune and the Religion News Services as well. In fact, it's been covered by a number of different places here. It's a new study, this is a Twitter reaction here from Jana Reese, who we're going to have on the Mormon News Roundup. She has agreed to come on here. I don't want to spill too many beans here, but we do have a commitment from her. A new study shows that only 42% of Utah adults say that they're members of the LDS Church, far lower than the 60% that the church claims on its rolls. And this has been published by sociologist Ryan Craig and a couple of others, and they explain the reasons behind the drop, which she posted to her religious news service article here, which says that, Utah is no longer a majority Mormon state. And this was done through a very rigorous sociological means. And I watched his 2-hour interview regarding his findings on Mormon stories. And I'm sure you're very familiar with it, but the basics of it are, why is Utah dropping in its level of Mormondom? What are some of the reasons why?
Well, a very strict, high demand, high control religion. I think that's maybe one of the reasons. And I don't even know if it's dropping, but perhaps statistically the reporting is becoming more accurate. I think that might have something to do with it because for so long, it's only been the church reporting. We haven't really had people self-reporting. There's a huge difference there. Once people are self-reporting, that's when you get more to the true number. So I've always suspected that the number was much lower than what the church reported. And I think these studies are just starting to confirm that for us.
There's a number of reasons why, and part of it is for migration. They're more likely to be Mormons moving into the state, but a vast majority of people who move into the state of Utah are not Mormons. And also there's a demographics change of, Latter-day Saints are having less birth rate. That was something that President Oaks talked about in his young adult devotional, and he lamented it in the young adult devotional, saying that, having a high birth rate is important to being a Mormon and also getting married young, very, very young. But we continue to see that birth rate among Latter-day Saints continues to drop and is only now just nominally above the national birth rate. And that marriage age of Latter-day Saints, which used to be quite low, is again approaching the U.S. standard norm. So in other words, the special character of being a Latter-day Saint is being watered down, and that's reducing the amount of people who consider, this is about self-affiliation, people who self-identify as Latter-day Saints. It's 42%. And, I spent a lot of time in Utah. I grew up there for a long period of time. And I always heard stories, even just a few years ago, that it was 2/3 or even 70%. Maybe not everybody goes to church, but I always thought it was going to be, if this study was done, I thought we were going to see something maybe like 62, 63%. That's what I expected. It's 20 points lower than what I thought it was going to be.
No, that's big. Now, if we can only have that somehow to trickle into the legislature, that's when I think people would wake up and start saying, "Oh, this is a difference here." But as it is now, what, 88%?
Yeah, I mean, that's it. It's 85, 88% of the Utah legislature are self-identify as Latter-day Saints. So it's a very much outsized proportionality inside the Beehive state. And it's really for a number of reasons. Is because a lot of Latter-day Saints, they vote conservative. I mean, not all of them, but a lot of them do. And when you have them mostly voting as a block, say 70% or 80% of Latter-day Saints vote conservative, if they're voting as a block, then you're going to be able to instill those Latter-day Saint candidates into the legislature. Since I saw one other article here from Reddit here that I want to bring into this particular analysis here too. And it says that 6 years ago, the Salt Lake Tribune and the Deseret News, they had an analysis that had 2050 projected for when Mormons would become the minority. 2050. Well, as of now, we're way past that point. That must have happened probably in the middle of COVID. And that's the thing is, we used to have the analysis from the church that the church was going to be, have 250 million members by, I think it was 2050. And now they're not even a majority in Utah. So, I mean, this is really the Mormon shrivel we're seeing it right in front of our eyes. And this was from a very rigorous analysis. This wasn't some shotgun poll that was done out of Reddit. This was published in the Sociological Journal. So, I mean, we're seeing people migrating in. They're not joining the church. They're not members to begin with. We're seeing people disaffiliate at a very, very high rate. Now, the church did respond to this particular article, which I actually watched Cardinal Ellis in Word Radio last night, and he was talking about this particular article. I watched a couple of different broadcasts. And by the way, I had Cardinal Ellis on the Mormon News Roundup as a long lost episode. You should check it out. It's very, very interesting stuff. But yeah, he said that when the church's statement, they came out and said, well, disaffiliation rates in the church are not higher than they've ever been. They're the same rate that they always have been. And I find that to be very remarkable. And my only thought to that is, well, can you please prove that? I mean, it's an easy claim to make. Go ahead and back it up with data, because, what we've seen from the SEC fine and from a lot of other things, it's very hard for me to take the church at its word for these particular type of claims when they seem to be in contrast to what we're seeing both from sociological studies, anecdotal information from the Quit Mormon website, and from a lot of other sources.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, there is the danger that you're looking for shrinkage and you're going to see shrinkage. A lot of us are in maybe some of a confirmation bias bubble. But I will say anecdotally, I have never seen, just more people choosing a different path. Anecdotally, people that I know personally. So, and I think there's a couple different factors too that nobody making all those predictions for 2050 could have ever foreseen. The internet, the COVID, just everything, just the culture. I mean, where I live right now in the heart of the bubble of Utah County, they're building a Starbucks. Like, they're building a Starbucks. Who would have thought? That tells you things have relaxed. Things are different.
I believe that was prophesied somewhere in the book of Revelations, but I can't quite remember where it was.
I think you're right.
This is Bishop Waddell saying, we realize this is just the start. The LDS leader says that decreasing baptism rates are helping fill the Great Salt Lake by not having to fill as many baptismal fonts with water. So, that's the joke here, is maybe they're going to start baptizing the brine shrimp.
Something
not sure about that. Yeah. If you also take a look at the number of congregations that the church is adding, we saw from the last couple of years that in North America, I believe it was, that the church has added in the last 2 years 50,000 members, which is a drop in a bucket. It's an extremely small amount. That's overall growth. And they have fit all of those 50,000 people into one congregation. That means that they were just backfilling the people who have already disaffiliated with. Yeah. And with regards to Cardinal Ellis and the church's spokesperson, go ahead and release not only the members of New Record, the converts, and go ahead and tell us how many people had their names removed. If you want credibility, we have a lot of scientific information. We have a lot of anecdotal information showing a high disaffiliation rate, and people seem to be heading for the exits. And that's not only in Mormonism, but it's in the wider context too. Throughout all of religiosity, secularism is on the ascendancy. So prove it by releasing every single year or every single month the number of people who have disaffiliated themselves or have had their names removed through membership through disciplinary courts. I know they don't call them disciplinary courts anymore, but membership courts.
Are they
membership courts?
Something to do with love, because there's nothing more loving than sitting down and being grilled by your church leaders and then cast out, right?
Yeah. I just the stone that was supposed to be cut out of the mountain without hands is crumbling in Utah. We're losing a rate in Utah of 1% per year. So we have 42% of people in Utah who are affiliating themselves as Latter-day Saints. In 20 years, that's going to be 20%.
Mhm.
And in 30 years, what we're going to see, this is my prediction here, Rebecca, what we're going to see is we're going to have three pockets of Mormonism in the future. It's going to be in Happy Valley.
Mhm.
It's going to be in Laie, Hawaii, and it's going to be in Rexburg, Idaho. 30 years time frame, those will be the only three locations on this planet that will have a high degree of concentration of Mormons.
Are you counting out Arizona? Because Arizona does have quite a large pocket there.
Well, I'm talking about a majority situation
Okay.
because what we've seen, Utah as a whole is not majority Mormon. Arizona certainly isn't.
Mm.
So it's only around the BYU campuses that you're going to have where the church is employing all of the people. It's only the BYU campuses in the future that will remain resilient and have a high percentage of greater than Mormons than non-Mormons. That's my prophecy or prediction, if you will. Any last thoughts on this study?
I think your prophecy prediction is accurate. However, I don't know if people will ever be aware because they will never share the dang numbers.
Hmm.
Ever. We'll never know.
Well, that's where whistleblowers come in, Rebecca.
That's right.
It's going to happen. Somebody in
That's
those
right.
research departments, there's going to be whistleblowers, there's going to be leaks, and it's only a matter of time until we know everything. And that's the entire point behind all of this. They tried to hide Ensign Peak for 20 years,
Mhm.
and we found out about it. They tried to hide different church history. We all found out about it. They're trying to hide the membership numbers. We're gonna find everything
Mhm.
out. Okay. So why not just get ahead of it to begin with? And be more transparent, since in the long run we will know it all. Eventually somebody will leak all of the church numbers back to whenever they were being kept. It's only a matter of time until it happens, or the church gets hacked, or whatever it is. So if you want to have the transparency, if you want to regain confidence in the membership, that's how you do it, is by being transparent instead of making absurd claims that we all know are not true. Okay, our next article here is the Black Menaces, who won the Salt Lake Tribune's readers' vote for the 2023 Utahn of the Year. And I was a little bit surprised by this one. Now, the Black Menaces, they're the viral TikTokers who they go around BYU campus and kind of give interviews that are somewhat controversial, and they're very they're very polarizing figures. We'll just put it that way. And the people who are involved in this, we had the Utah women's basketball star Alissa Pili, who finished second. We had David Nielsen, the IRS whistleblower. We
Mhm.
had the Governor Cox. Who would you have voted for here, Rebecca? Who is the Utahn of the Year?
Well, I'm happy that the Black Menaces won. I think they do a really interesting work as far as putting those questions out there, putting people on the spot and making them really think about how they feel and saying it out loud. I mean, it's very interesting to watch. I personally thought that David Nelson, the whistleblower for the SEC, as
Yes.
far as having an impact far into the future and something that really is going to make a difference and shake things up. I thought that he perhaps might have been voted as the person of the year. In my mind, that's who I would have voted for. But I'm also very pleased that the everybody on the list was amazing. So I'm glad the Black Menaces won.
I really thought that David Nielsen, considering the voting, I thought his impact in this planet is absolutely enormous, is absolutely tremendous what he was able to accomplish. And that's not saying that the Black Menaces haven't done good work. That's not what I'm saying at all. It's just that David Nielsen has been a transformative,
Mhm.
generational figure. He whistleblowed back in 19, I don't know if that's a word, but it was back in 2019, but he gave no media interviews into
Right.
intervening time frame. So it was hard to vote for him because we had no personal connection with him except for through his brother Lars Nielsen, who did the letter to the IRS director and a couple of other things. But it's hard to have a connection with him since we didn't have a face. We couldn't even put a face to it because he did the 60 Minutes interview, which we covered in our top 10 Mormon stories back in 2023. And he really humanized himself, and he came out amazing in that interview. He really did an incredible job in the interview. He was not an angry ex-Mormon axe grinder ready
Yeah.
to burn down the world and just trying to cash his check for the IRS whistleblower. That's not what he came across. The fact that he's just so transformative and generational, he's a hero in so many ways. And just, I feel like his scope is larger. The Black Menaces are heroes too. They're activists. They're doing a lot of great things, and they're both in their particular spheres. It's just that my vote is with David Nielsen.
Yeah, well, his work will continue. I mean, he is making a difference every single day. And I think you're right. I think he was vilified because he was silent. We didn't know him. We didn't know what he was doing, his motivations, who he was. And he came forward this year and we saw him a sincere, humble, well-meaning person. And his appeal only grew. We understood why he did what he did. And we have not seen the last of it at all.
Our next article here is Jodi Hildebrant, the business partner of Ruby Franke, has pled guilty. Now, Ruby Franke has already been incarcerated. She's already pled guilty to 4 out of the 6 counts of the child abuse. As this is the power Mormon couple down there in southern Utah who ran an incredibly harmful program for children and also for others through it was the Connections Academy. Was that the name of it again? Connections? Am I getting that right?
X.
Yes, Connections with an X Academy. Well, the other shoe has dropped here because her business partner has pled guilty to 4 counts of child abuse as well. Let me play this for you and get your reaction.
Then, Ms. Hildebrant, how do you plead to count 1, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
Guilty.
And to count 3, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
Guilty.
To count 5, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
Guilty.
And to count 6, also aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
Guilty.
Fine. Well, I think the due process of the law is happening. We saw that with Ruby. We now see it with Jodi. The wheels are turning and justice is being served. I did read that Jodi's house was for sale, a multi-million-dollar house. So I think their empire has crumbled. And I think we've seen so many horrific details that everybody is just happy to see justice being served. Now, my interest continues in this case simply because I don't think we know the full scope of her influence on the LDS counseling industry or programs. I think there's going to have to be some harm and harmful practices rooted out of the LDS programs, the 12-step programs that still exist, because as we learned during this whole process with Jodi, she sort of had the ear of the church as far as helping to develop some of these programs that people were put in. We've heard stories of tremendous harm. So I think it might be a process to root out these practices that I think probably are still going on in some way or another within the church. So we'll see, but hopefully healthy practices going forward, right? Better mental health for everyone and no harm.
Yeah, I mean, these weren't just rogue bad members of the church. They were involved in some of the church's official programs, including, I believe, the resiliency program and other things they had influence over those things. And now we've come to find out, and this is now both of them now have pled guilty to these incredibly horrific charges. And I, for one, have welcomed the swift application of justice. This has been remarkably quick. We used to seeing these things drag out for long periods of time. And because they pled guilty to these charges, it is wrapped up in a timely manner. And I hope that we don't hear much more from these two. I'm hoping we're closing a huge chapter on these two and that we're not going to be covering them again in the Mormon News Roundup. That's what I'm hoping.
Yep, I hope so too. Well, they both pled guilty. And like I said, the wheels of justice did their job. And hopefully you're right.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and this is not the only there's a lot of legal stuff every single week here. This is kind of a serious week, but we've got a lot of serious issues on tap this week. And as Tim Ballard is once again in the news, and this is really, really interesting stuff here. He's seeking a dismissal over his allegedly stolen lawsuit information. And this was a big surprise to me because what he's saying here, you know, he's the prominent figure he's been involved in 4 lawsuits in following the allegations that he sexually abused, sexually harassed women, and also that he wasted and squandered lots of donations. He's the former CEO of Operation Underground Railroad, and he's faced charges of sexual misconduct and misusing funds. Now, what he's filed in this last case here are really surprising, Rebecca. What's going on here?
Yeah, it is very interesting because both of us have been podcasting, over the last few months about this information, right? So much information that came out in the charges, in the suit. And now Tim is claiming that this information was stolen, personal emails, private correspondence, that his personal assistant obtained these illegally. And these are the basis, for everything that we've been podcasting on, all of the suits, everything that we've known. So that really does open up the question, could this suit completely be thrown out because of how the information was obtained?
Yeah, could potentially more than one suit be thrown out because
Mhm.
Celeste, who is his personal assistant, that's what Tim Ballard is alleging. You can't file lawsuits based on illegally obtained information.
Mhm.
Whether the Tim Ballard, who all intents of purposes, it appears that he is an incredibly reprehensible person and that there's basically no defense, and they have him stone cold dead to rights. When you read the lawsuits and the amended lawsuits, they have all these text messages that are in there, and they have all of this information
Mhm.
that is very, very private information. And I had no idea before this finally came out that Tim Ballard is saying, well, they had no right to get that information from me. And, look, I live in Virginia. Our state motto is don't tread on me. If Tim Ballard was engaged in illicit activities that can be proved legally, then he needs to face the music for that. But we have to be secure in our persons and papers. We have the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution that says that you can't just steal my information in order to make your lawsuit easier to prosecute. You have to obtain everything legally. I'm not defending Tim Ballard, but every
Mm-mm.
individual in this country has their own rights. And what I can't believe here is, what if this were to get thrown out here based off, I don't know if you want to call it a technicality, but based on Tim Ballard's inherent right to his own personal property? That would just be absolutely stunning, which is why when I had Glenn on from Infants on Thrones a couple of episodes, he goes, what do you want to see happen with Tim Ballard? And I said, well, I want justice to roll forth. And I said, I can't prejudge Tim Ballard. It seems like he is a really reprehensible individual, and I hope that he faces the consequences for his actions, but he has rights too. And that's the crazy thing. What if this were to get thrown out? That would just be
Yeah.
insane.
No, that absolutely would. But I think all of us who are podcasting, in the back of our minds, we were like, boy, this is really personal information. Where did this come from? And I think most of us thought, oh, it was revealed in the suit, the Davis County prosecutor, but there was a lot of information, comedy gold, if I can say that. And now to find out that perhaps it wasn't obtained through the proper channels, that's unfortunate because, as you said, everything could be thrown out if that's true.
I mean, we still have the criminal investigations that can be brought forward too. And I don't think that those are necessarily relying on the personal information. I'm not sure. It's a little bit murky right now. It's going to take years for it all to work its way out. But I'm a person who just likes to follow this. And I really hope that justice is served. That's all I can say. I'm not going to prejudge anything, but we're going to be watching it here on the Mormon News Roundup and the Mormonish podcast.
Yes, we are.
Hal R. Boyd is an editor for the Deseret News, and he snapped this picture with the first float of the Rose Parade. And here is the Mormon missionaries there. There's 4 Mormon missionaries in the parade there, 4 of them. And I call this crack reporting here by the Deseret News. This is the type of reporting that we get from the editor of the Deseret News. We get missionaries marching when the whole world seems to be burning down and melting. We're getting these little puff pieces. And here's the sister missionaries, by the way. They're using the sidewalk here. That's the type of reporting that we're getting from the Deseret News.
Yeah, well, I think there's a certain silo effect. They're just looking for the news that they know that their readers are going to want. And they're curious about the church and what the church is doing, how it's being represented. They love their missionary force, as they should. We love missionaries. But you're right. Where are the rest of the floats? They're
I
just
mean,
cute little boys walking down
there's so many articles this week that are really, really important to Mormondom. And this
Right.
is the type of reporting that you get out of the Deseret News. And I guess that's why the Mormon News Roundup really exists to begin with, is because this is not the type of things that I think are important or the type of things that I think are interesting.
Yeah, well, there are, the Deseret News has a certain mission and a certain readership, and a lot of those important articles, they're a little reticent to cover, if you know what I mean, or they have to cover it in a special and certain way. So better to just put something out like that, right? It's very positive, and there's no way to spin that in a negative way.
Absolutely not. Okay, now our next article here is, so the Salt Lake Tribune, based upon their readership, said what the top stories were. Now, we gave it a good crack last week on what we thought the top 10 stories of 2023 were, and I thought we did a fantastic job. I thought we got it 100% right. So, Rebecca, let's compare what the Salt Lake Tribune, what their readership valued with what we thought were the top stories. So here they are. And let's get your thoughts on it. Now, number 1, the latest changes in the temple ceremonies. That didn't crack our top 10, did it?
Well, it didn't. And I think our top 10 was more focused on national interest.
Yeah.
I don't think people would understand what a change to a temple ceremony meant. Although here in Utah, huge news. Everybody's buzzing about it. Everybody's rushing to attend the temple to see what those changes might be. It's always very exciting when there's something different going on in the temple.
Right. When you have 800,000 temple endowed adults in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints versus 8 billion non-members, this is going to be a very small effect worldwide. That's why it didn't make our top 10. Let's look at a couple of these other ones here. Pew Research poll shows that the church's public relations team has work to do. Americans view Catholics, Protestant, Jews, even evangelical Christians, Muslims, and atheists more favorably than Latter-day Saints. That was a top story, but it didn't crack our top 10.
Yeah, that was a big story. And now that I see that there, it possibly should have been mentioned because we did find out from multiple studies, oh my goodness, you know, I'm a Mormon. Those campaigns didn't really work. People are not seeing us in the light that we perhaps see ourselves or would hope that others saw us. So yeah, I agree that that was a pretty big story, I think.
Yeah, maybe calling Elder Kieran in, who's a public relations man, maybe he can turn the good ship Zion around on the public relations, because our top 10 stories, probably 7 out of the 10 of them were negative stories. And if your 7 out of your top 10 stories for the year are negative, it's not going to be a positive year for you. Here's a couple of the other ones that the Salt Lake Tribune said were top stories that, again, did not appear in our top 10. And it was that directive ousting women leaders from the stand during Sunday services in the Bay Area, which drew a lot of disappointment, frustration, and anger. We did cover that, but it wasn't a top 10 story.
Yeah, I agree. And there was a lot of attention to that, both inside the church and outside the church, because again, they sort of did and said publicly what we all know exists in the infrastructure, but they actually did it in public. So people got a taste of that. And that's an ongoing story too, because in March, there's supposed to be a great walkout on St. Patrick's Day where women are not supposed to attend church or perhaps attend, but not participate in their calling. So I think it's still in the works. I think the petition is still being signed. So it's still going to have some momentum. And I think we'll still see this story touched on in 2024.
Last couple of ones that they had here, where we definitely did cover this. Latter-day Saint Apostle M. Russell Ballard is accused just weeks before his death of sharing tithing records with Operation Underground Railroad, an allegation the church and key prosecutor knocked down. Now, that was our number 2 story this last year. That was absolutely enormous. We definitely thought that was a big story.
Yep, that was huge. That was all part of the Tim Ballard, free for all that seemed to go on for months and months and months.
Yep. And this last one, which is the church putting up thousands of acres for sale in Missouri, raising more than a few eyebrows among members, but it still holds tens of thousands of additional acres in its former and future Zion. We did cover real estate as one of the top 10. I believe it was our number 9, but yes, real estate. So we're in somewhat of an agreement with the Salt Lake Tribune, but I guess we just have a slightly different perspective. I personally prefer our own perspective, I guess, to each their own. Right?
No, I agree. And I appreciate your perspective, because as we prepare the stories for the top 10, we do think about the national and international focus. How are Mormons being portrayed and seen on the bigger stage, not just our small stage?
Right. Yeah, I think you're right. The Salt Lake Tribune, yes, it is somewhat Utah centered. Of course, the Mormonism is a Utah. Even the church spokesperson this week acknowledged that it's a Utah based faith. So, yeah, it does look inwardly. We were trying to look more nationally and not necessarily internationally. I think our top 10 was more United States focused than it was internationally focused. I think that we have a bias.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. Although if you look at it, membership is larger internationally than it is nationally. So, and growing in that way. In fact, I heard through some sources that the top language spoken in the church is French. Isn't that unusual?
That seems hard to believe, but I guess from all the African converts, right?
That is exactly why. That is it. Yeah.
Well, I would have thought it was the Adamic language, but I guess that just shows you.
Do you speak the Adamic language? I've never been able to master that.
Tough language to it's actually a relatively easy language to learn, believe it. It sounds a lot like English, so it's not that hard actually. A couple of other big news points here this week, and this was another one that just went viral here over the last couple of days, and this was very surprising to me. Is we saw, I think one of the very first times here, a sitting bishop who resigned over the pulpit here. This was an individual here who was in Mississippi. We don't have time to play his entire segment here, but this really went viral, and he resigned, and he said over the pulpit that he just didn't feel comfortable being a bishop anymore, and that the church apparently, and I'm trying to read and be as charitable as I can about what he said, that the church asked him to do things that were against his conscience. Is that, I know you watched the entire 7-minute clip here. What did you get from it there, Rebecca?
Yeah, this is probably the biggest story, I think, so far, this first week of 2024, where a sitting bishop, looks like a very wonderful, kind person, got up on the stand and told his congregation that he was going to have to step down simply because his conscience, his inner guide was telling him he could not do the things that he had to do as a bishop. Which begs the question, what are those things, that you have to do? There have been some speculation that it had to do with interviews, that it had to do with not being able to report abuse, that it had to do with asking probing questions to youth. I mean, all this is speculation, of course, but this person in particular just said, I can't do it anymore and I'm going to have to step down. He also said he stayed as long as he did because of the youth who he loves, and he got very emotional during this video. And it made me think that he's been wrestling with this for a very long time, but he did say he loves the youth so much. And I think that he sees, the value of what he's doing and working with the youth, but he just can't do it anymore. And then he did sort of give a plea to the youth to say, use your conscience, stand up for justice, stand up for what you know is right. So it's a very poignant, heartfelt little talk. It's only about 7 or 8 minutes. I think you can find it almost anywhere now if any of your viewers want to go out and look on the different platforms. But yeah, what were your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, it was taken down. It was put up.
Mhm,
It was taken down. It seemed to
mhm.
be going back and forth on the battling on getting it up or not. And people were speculating as to whether the church was involved in the taking down of the video. I don't think that it was. When you film a congregational setting, the church does, I believe, own the rights to
Mhm.
those particular chapel videos. So yeah, the church could have been involved, but I don't think that it was. It's just very surprising to see a sitting bishop resign
Mhm.
in this manner. A lot of times when bishops either lose faith or say, they've had a change of heart or they don't want to do something, they are released very quietly out the back of the pews. And, they're very quietly released. It's all done below board. When people leave the church, they're doing so in very public ways now, like Matt Easton or like
Yeah.
Jillian. I'm sorry, who's the, I lost the
Yeah.
name.
Now I can't think of her name either.
The other BYU who, no, it's
Yeah.
Jillian.
Stepped
Shoot.
away.
Yeah, who stepped away. People do it in a very public manner now. Charlie Bird. It used to be that leaving the church was a great embarrassment to you.
Mhm.
Not that he's left the church, but even stepping down from a calling. And that's what he said in his talk. It used to be that you couldn't even step down from a calling or you'd be shamed. I think in the wider capacity of the church, people are starting to realize that we can't be as dogmatic about callings, about people leaving the church, and that the stigma has gone away. You remember back 100 years ago, the church in the Deseret News used to publish the list of the apostates and the people who had been excommunicated as
Yeah.
a shaming tactic and used to be completely ostracized from your community. Well, what we've seen is from the church being less than the majority in Utah, we can't do that anymore. People are taking videos and people are proud about their life
Mhm.
choices. And if he's having to wrestle with something morally in his calling, I mean, what could that be? Especially since he talked about the youth so much
Mhm.
and the values
Mhm.
of the youth. And it really brings up like Sam Young. Was there
Yeah.
something
Yep.
happening there, especially with sexually explicit
Mhm.
questions in Temple Recommend interviews that was troubling this bishop? That's what a lot of the speculation is about.
I think so too. And I think now that when people leave, they want people to understand I'm not lazy. I'm not sinning. These are the reasons. These are real reasons. I'm having a moral issue with having to do the things that I'm expected to do. And I know a lot of people are like this. Anecdotally, I have a relative who served as a bishop long before Sam Young, and he refused to close the door and have youth alone with him. He said, I'm not going to do that. He invited parents in. This is years ago before, anybody was thinking about that. And he got in trouble for that. He had a lot of people saying, no, you have to close the door. You have to interview him. He wouldn't do it because he morally and personally said, I'm not doing this. This is not what I'm doing. I think a lot of people have been silent heroes like that. And now they're just saying, no, I'm going to, even if I'm still in the church, I'm going to openly come out, explain what I think, explain where I'm coming from, and change is going to happen. Just like Sam Young, who stood up and said, we're not doing it anymore. And change has happened. So it'll be interesting to see more, if there is more from this bishop. I know that a lot of people are, just liking, putting hearts on everything he's doing, saying he's a hero. He's definitely had a huge impact this first week in 2024. And he's really opened that conversation. What is it that a bishop is asked to do that he might personally find completely repugnant. And it reminds me, not to bring up this other extraordinarily horrific case, but the Arizona case, where a lot of us said, how could all of these men on the high council, in the bishop, a couple different bishops, hear these stories of abuse?
You mean with Paul Adams and the
Yes,
AP
that's what I'm
abuse
talking
case?
about. Abuse of a child, could hear these stories, go home and do nothing. To me, you would have to be wrestling there. And there are some men like this bishop that we just saw. He's not going to wrestle. He's going to remove himself because he can no longer consciously do it. I think about the 13 clone company managers who were made to lie and sign falsely on documents to cover the church's money.
In
Two of
Ensign
them
Peak
said,
Associates, in Ensign Peak Advisors. Yeah.
exactly. Two of them said, I can't do it and I won't do it. And they recused themselves. So I think you're seeing a great walkout among faithful members who are just saying, I morally cannot do this anymore. And I'm sorry.
Yeah, so he said specifically that it wasn't because he did some kind of a sin, and he didn't resign his membership.
Mhm.
So that must
Mhm.
mean that there's something inherent with being a bishop that has troubled his conscience, but he still wants to retain his membership. So what is it that bishops could possibly do that could violate his conscience? And you're right. It's with the bishop with the self-reporting. Did he learn about some abuse in the ward, call the church's so-called helpline, receive counsel from Kurt McConkie that he wasn't supposed to report child sex abuse, and that went against his moral conscience. And of course, if you don't follow the Kurt McConkie lawyer's advice, that's worse than not following your stake president. That's worse than not following a general authority. That's unthinkable. And it's also about wanting to control the narrative. If you just slink out the back door like so many people do, then the stories will just be told on your own. He wanted to control the narrative and say, this is the reason why. And he said that someone else will have to pick up the torch and do the morally questionable things that he was asked to do, and that someone else should do those instead of him. And when people act on their conscience, like David Nielsen, like Sam Young, like this bishop, and they say, my morals are higher than what the church is asking me to do, those people, they should be applauded for their efforts.
I think they are. I mean, the love that is pouring out to this bishop in social media, people they absolutely appreciate what he did, and he's a hero. He's absolutely a hero.
You can find the Mormonish podcast on Instagram. You can also find the Mormon News Roundup on Instagram. If you could leave us a 5-star review, we're both on Apple Podcasts. We'd be very grateful for that. Or leave us a thumbs up and give us a subscription. Those things help us out a lot. Now, this next article, Rebecca, when I came across it at middle of this week, I didn't think it was going to be as big of an article as it turned out to be. And this was very, very interesting here. 50 Mormon churchgoers suffer carbon monoxide poisoning during a service. And I just thought that this was just going to be one of those things that just kind of was unfortunate because nobody was seriously injured in this particular case. But I didn't think it was going to be as big as it was. But it really actually is probably the number 2 story of the week.
I think so too. It was picked up nationally by a lot of outlets because so many people were hospitalized. That's what was really surprising, is that, they actually, there was a lot of physical harm.
Sunday's massive carbon monoxide poisoning is a cautionary tale of the threat that escalates every winter. 2 people died 2 months ago in Carbon County, but here in Sevier County, thankfully, no one had to start off the new year by losing a loved one. The last day of 2023 was a scary one for the city of Monroe.
You don't want to believe something bad's happening. Everybody's like, oh, that's just, all coincidence.
It all started with a call from the East Chapel of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, where a 4-year-old with breathing problems needed an ambulance. An hour later, an adult man was also feeling sick.
There's just a lot of pieces of the puzzle that all lead towards something's going on down there.
Members went home feeling lethargic and suffering headaches. Clint Wyrick knew he had to call dispatch.
I had a friend that just lost his best friend to carbon monoxide, and he, a month ago, was telling me all about it. Part of that was in the back of my head, like just make the phone call.
According to the LDS Church, 54 people in the building that day had symptoms of carbon monoxide poisoning. 49 had to go to the hospital, and 22 of them had to go outside the area for medical care. The county didn't have enough ambulances for the necessary number of transports, so nearby agencies stepped in to get people to hyperbaric chambers.
It's kind of cool living in a small town. Everybody's kind of looking out for each other.
The meeting house is closed for now as investigators look into the cause. According to the CDC, over 100,000 people across the U.S. visit the ER each year because of carbon monoxide poisoning.
Talk to other people when you don't feel good, because if there's a group of you all not feeling good at the same time, like, yeah, look at the evidence.
In a statement sent to Fox 13 News, the church says they're supporting medical and other expenses for those who were affected. A spokesperson also said they're, quote, taking this matter seriously and are concerned for the well-being of everyone involved.
My first take is that I'm glad that that individual was aware of what the symptoms of carbon monoxide poisoning are, because simply returning home from church feeling lethargic, I don't know if anybody would recognize that as a health issue, because in my experience, that's kind of how I felt every Sunday. But no, this is big. I know missionaries have lost their life because of carbon monoxide poisoning. I will just say that this is a huge issue. There have been other cases of this happening in churches. And while this building was not required to have a carbon monoxide detector or any kind of infrastructure there to protect against that, it really raises the question of why not? Why just voluntarily would not this be part of how you protect your congregation? All safeguards, fire alarms, sprinklers within the building, carbon monoxide detectors. I don't think anybody goes to church thinking this might not be a safe place.
Well, I was actually just looking up the code here, Rebecca, for Utah as far as carbon monoxide detectors. And it looks like, and I'm not an expert on this, but you have to have a minimum of one carbon monoxide alarm shall be established on any habitable level, meaning if people are going to be sleeping there, then you're required to have a carbon monoxide detector there. And of course, people are not going to be sleeping at a chapel. So that's why I don't believe that they're required. But, you know, let me just say a bit about this, because I've been thinking about this a great deal this week, especially since it was such a big news article. So, I mean, I don't talk that much about myself and my own personal life on this podcast, but a lot of what I do is in rental properties. Okay, so I have a number of rental properties, and I have carbon monoxide detectors in every single one of them because it's required. But it's not just about it being required. You know, the church could also have carbon monoxide detectors in its chapels because it's the best practice. It's about taking care of the flock, of your congregation. And my carbon monoxide detectors, they're connected to Wi-Fi, and they will send me an alert the moment that the levels go to an unsafe level. I have the same thing for fire. I have the same thing for smoking. I have the same thing for temperature in case it gets too hot, like the building's going to be on fire. Smoke, all of this is Wi-Fi connected. We live in 2023, Rebecca. It is too easy to safeguard your buildings, your apartments, the things that you are controlling. We know for a fact that most of these North American congregations, the value of them is somewhere between $1.5 million and $2 million. And the church owns 15,000 worldwide, about 14 or 15,000 congregations. You could easily put a carbon monoxide detector in each and every single one of these, have them Wi-Fi connected, and then every time there's an alert, it could go back to, I don't know, pick someone, church headquarters, someone whose job it is to monitor these things to ensure the safety of the people who are involved. Why is the church not prioritizing its members over the bottom line? It makes no sense.
No, that is interesting. And not only just the members, but think about all the cases of vandalism that we've heard recently on stake centers and chapels. Why are there no cameras or alarms? I mean, if you're not going to prioritize members, at least prioritize your building. And then maybe the members benefit through that if you have all kinds of detection, devices. So I don't know either. It raises a lot of questions, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I also have on all of my rental properties, I have cameras that are installed. Now, I mean, you can't put them on the inside of a person's residence, but you can put them on the outside, and the church could have them in each of the hallways going down. They could have them on the outside, on the inside, because what we see with the church and vandalism is a lot of times these vandals will hit multiple chapels in one situation. In fact, sometimes they'll even do 10 or 15, and the church has no security whatsoever at its local chapel levels, at least from what I've seen in North America. Not even Ring cameras. cameras. You could set up these Ring cameras to have alerts for you. They don't have to be Amazon. They don't have to be Ring. The church could have its own, could make its own software. It could have its own products. That way it's not tied to Jeff Bezos, but it could send you an alert. If somebody is walking down the chapel hall at 2:00 in the morning, it sends an alert back to someone at church headquarters that you're paying security with, who says, whoa, why is there an alert at 2:00 in the morning at a Layton chapel? Okay, he checks it. It was a false alarm. Okay, no problem. Or he checks it and there's a bunch of kids in there doing nefarious things. It's the minimum, and the cost for this is extraordinarily small. The church is a mega corporation, but it is not engaging in the best practices in the industry, not only to protect its own property, but to protect the people who go to church. You know, we don't even know when you go into a church, you don't know if there's a nefarious individual who's in there ready to harm you. And that's happened before as well. In fact, this week, it's about safeguarding everybody. My own ward here in the Northern Virginia area was vandalized a couple of months ago by a bunch of nefarious individuals. And what did the church do to upgrade its security or to do something to stop the situation? Absolutely nothing.
It almost seems like a conscious choice not to have care or concern over the membership, which is so strange. And it just reminded me of when I first moved to where I live now. We were meeting in a 100-year-old historic church building. I mean, old. And my husband and I were called, of course, to be nursery leaders, because that's where you put somebody who's more nuanced. And the nursery was in an upper story. It was like a 3-level church building. And there was a window that was stuck open on that upper story. On the other side of the room was an old-fashioned blazing hot radiator that was absolutely like 100 degrees if you touched it or more. So my husband and I spent our nursery duty, one of us blocking the window, the other of us blocking the radiator as these kids ran around in the room. And we never thought to ask for better conditions. We just accepted it. Oh, this is what we're going to operate it in. So I think there's some of that too. We're used to not being cared for in that way, or having our, physical well-being looked after in the church. So nobody says anything. But now that I think back, that's absolutely insane. Any of those kids could have really been hurt with that open window stuck open and that radiator. Two really big hazards in one nursery room. And why they put the nursery there, I have no idea.
I mean, it's insane. I also ended up in the primary as well. So I guess piano playing abilities, in the piano. It is nice that the church said that they were going to support the medical bills here, but what does that? That's the important question. What does that mean? What I would have expected the church to say is, we're going to cover all medical bills in this situation all the way through to the end. Please rest assured that we messed this one up, but we're going to make things right and cover all medical. Instead, we get supporting the medical, which is a huge difference. See, this is what I would expect from an organization that valued its members. What I would expect immediately is a church press release and an interview from a senior church leader. In fact, dispatching a senior church leader, maybe even an apostle, who comes to the scene and says, you know what? We messed this one up. I want to apologize to each and every one of these family members for dropping the ball here. I've appointed a task force of these couple of 70s over here, and they're going to look at the industry best practices and how we can safeguard not only from carbon monoxide, but from vandalism, from fire, from whatever else it is. We're going to put a task force together, and we're going to ensure, I'm going to get those recommendations in the next week. We're going to implement that throughout the church, and we're going to make sure that this never happens again. Meanwhile, that apostle is ministering to these families, apologizing to them, meeting with them in the hospital. It's an entirely different reaction than what we get. Instead, we get just a vague, we're going to support you. It's just, it's so disappointing as far as the safety of the members is concerned. And just one other thing, I mean, it goes to a wider thing of the background checks for the people who are working with children, or the missionaries who are currently on bicycles, who there's no reason for them to be on bicycles. There is a pattern in the church of not caring for the safety of the members. Okay. And it really has got me fired up on this, because this is my industry. People who are in buildings there's a level of charge, of trust, of you've got to take care of people. And the church keeps dropping the ball in even the simplest tasks And to save a few dollars on a carbon monoxide detector.
Oh, and I would even say having members clean the buildings themselves using products that don't contain bleach, which is, we all joke about that church smell, but it's not a joke. For some vulnerable individuals, those kinds of airborne viruses, it's not a clean and healthy environment. And I think the members just accept it. Oh, there's a church smell. Yeah, there's an open window. Yeah, there's a radiator. In fact, I read on social media a post from someone that was one of the people that had to go to the hyperbolic chamber. Their family had been affected, and they actually spun it on social media as a positive faith promoting experience. They talked about Jesus breathing life into us, and the hyperbolic chamber breathed life into their family. I mean, they spun it as a faith promoting story, and they talked about how supportive the ward had been to them, which of course the members are going to rally, their own are being sent to the hospital. But the person posting this never looked farther to say, why did this happen? How can we stop this from happening again? It seems like just an acceptance that this is part of attending church. There are going to be some hazards. There are going to be some problems. Really, unfortunately, I get emotional when I think about it because I have a connection to this. Missionaries have lost their life because of carbon monoxide poisoning. So this is something that does not have to happen with even a minimal level of care.
Minimal level. Do you know how much it costs me to monitor the carbon monoxide in my properties every month? I think it's like $8. It's absolutely nothing. And, we had a chapel here close. I'm in the DC area that was in Chevy Chase, Maryland. It was a very historic, one of the original Mormon chapels that was built out here back in like the 1960s, and it burned to the ground. I have in all of my properties a sensor which indicates the level of the temperature. And if it goes above 90 degrees, it sends me an immediate text message, meaning there's something that's wrong in here. So if that message had been sent by church headquarters, if you had the proper carbon monoxide or fire sensors, that as soon as it got to 90 degrees, it sends an alert to somebody who's at church headquarters. They take a look at the internal cameras. They see a little bit of smoke happening. And this is before it burst through the roof, which is when the fire department was called. You could have saved that chapel. Yeah. You could have saved these people's lives. You could have saved those elders' lives. All those kids who die every year on bicycles as missionaries. By putting them in the cars, you can save lives. You can do so much better with the vast resources that you have. It all comes down to this, Rebecca. It's because the church refuses to admit that it's wrong in anything. Yeah. It can't learn from itself. It can't say in this situation, it can't send Elder Holland out here and say, you know what? We messed this one up. I want to apologize to you, but I'm going to make things right. And that's because, Elder Holland got something wrong. Well, if he's wrong about this, is he also wrong about the second token of the Melchizedek priesthood? Because it calls everything into question for them, even though rationally that makes no sense. Any last thoughts on this one?
Well, I was just thinking, and I can't remember which newspaper it was in, but of course there was the article, poison, congregants are poisoned. And then the very next day, there's an article that says carbon monoxide detector not needed. Like they wanted to make sure it wasn't what you described. We're going to do better. We're going to do this. It's, we didn't technically need to have one. Well, that's no excuse, as we've talked about here. But yeah, you can do no wrong. You can't be seen as doing wrong.
What the basics of the law require is far from what morality and ethics require and good business practice requires. There's just a huge difference between the two. And we continue to see time and time again that the church only does the bare minimum of what the law requires, whether it's in reporting sex abuse, whether it's doing background checks, or whether it's safeguarding its own buildings. And I've got to leave this one on a little bit of a lighter note here, Rebecca. You put this one out on Trexmo. What do we see here?
Oh, dear. Yes, it's true. I did make a Trexmo and I can't even read my own Trexmo now.
That says, okay, our closing hymn can be found on page 8, and I'd announce it, but I'm about to pass out. You got to find some humor in it.
But not to make light. I mean, and I don't think people realize this is so serious, especially for the vulnerable, children or older adults. If they had not recognized that this was carbon monoxide poisoning, there could have been some very serious consequences. So thank goodness people were aware and able to get help right away.
Yeah, the folks with comorbidities, there was an infant in this one who was already had some breathing problems, that had some serious problems, who was an older gentleman who also had comorbidities. This could have been incredibly serious. People commit suicide through carbon monoxide by, closing up their garage and then leaving the car on. It can have serious effects on it. And the church just needs to do much, much better in this. And I've laid out the plan on how this can be done in so many ways. It's so simple for it to have happen. And I understand that the church leaders are ecclesiastical leaders and that they're not necessarily real estate moguls. Okay. But that's why you hire the best people to take care of this for you. You know what I mean? You have the money to do it, so get it done. But speaking of real estate, the church is making a lot of moves in real estate, and this one really caught my eye. And once again, this was covered very locally here in Florida. This is the Commercial Observer. The Mormon Church has bought the Miami Industrial Park for $174 million. It's the real estate investment arm here, Rebecca. Property Reserve Inc., which is the church's go-to for buying these type of big industrial complexes. They bought the Beacon Logistics Park in Hialeah, Florida, according to property records. And once again, we've seen this time and time again. What are they buying this for? Well, they're buying it so that they can take over tenancy for the people who are involved, so that those people will continue to pay to the church the rent that's associated with this. And just before I get your reaction, just remember that the last year in 2022, the church spent $200 million in humanitarian efforts. And the previous year, they spent $100 million in humanitarian efforts, not including the fast offering, because I consider that to be a pass-through. So in one day, the church has equaled its entire humanitarian outlook for the previous year. And that's just one real estate move here.
Yeah, but people aren't looking at those numbers together at all. In fact, I think we're inoculated to their real estate purchases. Almost every week there's something. They bought this, they bought that, they did that. We don't even pay attention, but you're absolutely right. If you are putting those together with humanitarian contributions and donations, they absolutely pale in comparison. Absolutely.
Yeah, and we covered in the top 10 that the church bought the Kent Washington Industrial Complex, which was the largest deal on the West Coast last year, which was also approached, I believe it was around $200 million. In UK, it purchased the Wembley, Wembley building there for, I believe it was about 100 million pounds. It was $100 million, actually 74 million pounds or so. The church is making these real estate moves, hundreds of millions of dollars at a time. And when they move in here, Rebecca, they're not doing it on a loan. They're bringing it cash. They write a check and that check clears every time.
Absolutely. That's it. They own it flat out. And I think Jesus said, go ye forth and buy industrial complex. I think it's somewhere. I don't know where in the scriptures, but somewhere. No, but to me, I think members, they look at it and there's satisfaction. There's pride. Our church is doing well and we're successful. And I don't think they question why. Why are we buying? I mean, I can almost understand farmland, church farms, more than I can understand these already operating, up and running industrial complexes that they've been building. It's really interesting, but I know there's a sense of pride and, that rainy day fund, right? We've got to gather all the property that we can, at the same time divesting yourself of property in Missouri. That's another thing I think that escapes most members, because there's still that idea. I saw it posted on social media just the other day. Someone had given a talk, we're all going back to Missouri. And I don't know if anyone raised their hand and said, well, technically they're like selling everything in Missouri. So think this through. I don't know.
Yeah, well, and the church still owns a lot of Missouri, but they're selling. They're selling when it's advantageous to do so, not necessarily for theological reasons. When they can make $1, then let's sell. If they can make $1 by buying, then it's all about the bottom line. It's not really about theology anymore.
Not at all. It's business. And I think people try to put it in a theological or a religious context, but it's not. It's a corporation doing what a savvy corporation would do, selling when the prices are great, buying when they're low, holding it. It has nothing to do with the religion, not at all.
Or feeding the homeless, or lifting the hands that hang down, or strengthening the feeble knees. Now, you talked about, Rebecca, that you thought that the church members would take a lot of pride in seeing these type of purchases. I might want to push back just a little bit with you, because what we see is that the church never covers its commercial aspects through its church affiliated news outlets like KSL, the Deseret News, and the Church News. They will not cover anything that has to do with these in the church publications. Now, if the church was really taking pride in this, and the members would take pride in it, one would imagine that they would be covered, but they almost never are. Everything that has to do with the Deseret Management Corporation, which is the parent of the Property Reserve Inc. that we saw that purchased this, it is complete silence at church headquarters. So if it's really people really taking a lot of pride in it, how come the church never wants to talk about it?
Yeah, because I think if you see purchase after purchase after purchase, eventually members are going to go, what is this about, really? But I think when I talk about pride, I'm just talking about sort of a general idea that we're doing very well. We're successful monetarily. And of course, that equates to righteousness, right? Is prosperity gospel 101. I just had to make this comparison because the two articles came out about the same time. And I said, they bought this, which is the Mormon Church buys Miami Industrial Park for 174 million. And then I said, but they didn't buy this and 2 carbon monoxide detectors for under $20 that you can get on Amazon.
You know, one of those 2 purchases can make money. One of them will generate income in the long run. Another one of those will not generate any money. And I'm going to give you out there, listeners, one guess as to which one the church bought. You know, it's
Right.
incredible to see the priorities of where the church really spends the money. When it really shells out the money, it's in something that is going to generate income for the church. It's not in helping even its own congregants. That's just the most amazing thing. You know, I go back because I'm in real estate, and a lot of my family is in real estate. And it'd just be unthinkable to manage the properties that in the way that the church does year after year. This isn't 1940s. You can't just blame this on, oh, well, carbon monoxide detector, our batteries were low and somebody forgot to change them. That story could work in 1940. I can check the carbon monoxide level battery of my devices right now using an app on my phone. And it sends me a text message when those carbon monoxide detectors get down to 20%. It sends me an alert. And when it gets down to 5%, it sends me another alert. It says, you got to change these things right away. There's no excuse for dropping the ball in this manner. And those people, there was no reason for them to get hurt.
Right.
So, you know,
Well, and I also think just to cover yourself from a lawsuit, right? Isn't
Yeah.
that part of it too? I mean, it is. As a landlord, you want to cover yourself.
That's the most amazing thing is when the church gets sued on whether it's sexual abuse or whether it's in other capacities, the church has insurers that pay those lawsuits. So it's like they don't even feel that people say, how can the church tolerate all of the sexual abuse? How can they tolerate all of the lawsuits? How can they tolerate all this? It's because the church has insurance that writes the checks for all these things. It doesn't even, if the church is just so protected from everything that it does, it's almost immutable. It's just, it's a juggernaut that just, it's almost like it just cannot be stopped. And honestly, this is a little bit of a tangent. The only thing that really I think that can stop the church, and I went back since I had Glenn from Infants on Thrones on the podcast, which was a very good episode. He talked about how when Lars Nielsen came forward initially, he came on Infants on Thrones as one of the very first things that he did. And those 2 episodes are absolutely incredible. The only thing, according to Lars Nielsen, that can stop the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and it's not going to be C-list podcasts like the Mormon News Roundup, it's the IRS complaint.
Yeah.
And if the church loses the tax-exempt status on Ensign Peak and has to pay back the taxes from Ensign Peak for the 22 years, which would be approximately $50 billion, and it loses that tax-exempt status, that will bring the church to its knees. That's the only thing that can change the trajectory of how the church values its people and its property.
No, I agree, but that would have to be a bigger change, I think, in how everything operates as far as tax exempt status for churches. I mean, that has to be changed on a huge scope. Yeah, so this article I thought was really interesting because, gosh, last year at some point, there were some documents leaked, a survey and a study that the church had put together for changes to the whole downtown area where the temple is with, there's major renovations going on. So I was very surprised to see this suddenly mentioned in the Salt Lake Tribune. Were you surprised to see this?
Yeah, you kind of leaked this one a little bit. It got leaked, but we're seeing these updated plans here, which show that the downtown area, it's going to be like a central park. I absolutely love this concept here of being able to walk from end to end with all of these cool buildings, all of these Temple View restaurants, these lawns, these pools. It's going to completely transform downtown. I imagine this is going to be a multi-billion-dollar operation. Absolutely incredible. I like what I'm seeing here.
Yeah, no, it looks really good, I think. And this study that came out, I think it was in 2021 and it was kind of leaked. I mean, it really showed that they understand that when people go to Temple Square, they don't really comprehend what's happening there. There were all these survey questions of people that had gone to Temple Square, and people were saying, we don't really know what happens here. We don't know what the temple is. The survey showed that women and minorities felt uncomfortable on Temple Square. So I think based on these user surveys of people that had been going to Temple Square, they tried to make all these changes. So some of the ideas, this to me is the most fascinating one, is to actually have a temple that is not dedicated, that visitors could go in and see. Well, it says see what happens there. They wouldn't really see what happens there. They would see what exists inside the temple. They would see the rooms, they would see the font, and missionaries would be able to take them through and show them more about what a temple is all about. Of course, then this temple could be dedicated, it said in the article, if needed, if they needed overflow from Salt Lake. So to me, that's an absolutely fascinating idea, that a temple can be dedicated and undedicated. They talked about having a people mover, much like Disneyland. It's almost kind of got a theme park feel to it. I mean, we do already have celestial, terrestrial, and telestial kingdoms, in the church. So maybe it would be something like that. And of course, I'm being facetious there, but the idea is just to make it a destination like Vatican City almost, and to even change the name to something that they said had more, I don't know, weight to it. The Mountain of the Lord is what they would call it. So you would no longer say, I'm going to visit Temple Square. You'd say, I'm going to the Mountain of the Lord, which, yeah, that definitely says something. Oh my goodness.
I love the plans. I think it'd be tremendous. I mean, they say it's going to take 10 years. It's going to take
Mhm.
billions of dollars, but I don't know. Call me crazy. I like it. Having outdoor concerts along here, being able
Mhm.
to walk along here. I think it's a fantastic concept. Yeah, I know it costs a lot of money, and call me a materialist if you will. And obviously the church has plenty of money. And if they're going to spend it on anything, why not spend it on this? I think it's going to be interesting. I want to watch it. I grew up, spent so much time in Salt Lake City. That's it's kind of my hometown, my home away from home. So we'll see. It's $1 billion. What's $1 billion? They spent $1.4 billion on the City Creek Mall. What's another couple billion to redevelop this, right?
Yeah, well, and the article made it sound like, oh, this was just a survey and a study and it may not happen. However, I have some insider information. So I was at Temple Square over the summer, and a wonderful elderly senior missionary was kind of taking us around. We were looking at the giant pit where the temple was. And he said, this morning I was in a meeting and they mentioned that there's going to be a new project. It's going to be $550 million and it's going to be right over there. And he kind of pointed to the area where this map that you just showed was. So this person, I don't know if he was supposed to talk about it, but he did tell us that there was something in the works for $550 million that they wouldn't really go into the details of. So I don't know. That to me says like something may be happening.
We keep hearing a lot of rumors about this, and usually rumors, are usually based on some kind of sources.
Mhm,
So I wouldn't be
mhm,
surprised if we see something in the downtown area because President Nelson has a grandiose vision. We know that his grandiose vision also is in dealing with buildings and real estate. He loves his buildings, he loves his real estate, and he is not at all afraid to spend money on these type of endeavors. And when you combine those together with what he wants to leave a legacy behind
mhm.
of temples and of buildings and of at least money with the church. And I can't think of a larger legacy piece than to completely transform downtown in a 10-year long, $5 billion mega transformation that would leave his stamp on the church going forward. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see something like this.
Yeah, I think it's happening. There's even supposed to be a lake if you look at the plans. I mean, it's huge. And think about it, the Olympics are coming, right? What more of an impetus do you need to start something like this? The Olympics are coming. Now, I will say that part of the plans that I saw, there was discussion of how to keep people out of this area, gates, berms, things like that. So they're still having that thing where they're like, we don't want everybody to be there on Temple Square. Sorry, the mountain of the Lord. It's going to take a while, I think, for a lot of us to be able to use the new term. And they pointed out in these plans, it's no longer going to be a square. So we do need a new name, the mountain of the Lord.
Well, if this project is going to take 10 years and the Salt Lake Olympics are going to be in 2034, then
Mhm.
better start seeing something happen
Yep.
soon. Now, I mean, the Salt Lake Temple has already been in a 4-year transformation. The Assembly Hall is also going to be retrofitted, and a
Mhm.
couple of other buildings are also the North Visitor Center. I'm not sure if that's open yet. That's also going through some stuff. So, I mean, we're starting to see some of the pieces that are coming together. Maybe it's part of a big plan that we're not aware of. But we got 2 last articles to go through, and that's the church recently announced that they've distributed their 200 millionth copy of the Book of Mormon. And by the way, for those eggheads out there, it's not Book of Mormons and it's not Books of Mormon. It's copies of the Book of Mormon, if you want to be technical about it. That's a lot of books there, Rebecca. What do you think?
That is a lot of books, but to me, the word is distributed, right? These are not people that purchased the book or asked for the book. These books were handed out. As we all know, I remember my dad going on business trips and taking a briefcase full of Book of Mormons that he would hand out to people. So yes, they have been flooding the earth. The church has been giving the Book of Mormons, but people have not. I don't know what the stats are on people that requested a Book of Mormon. That might be a different number.
Well, what's I guess amusing is, I did back on the Mormon Movie Reviews channel, I did Man's Search for Happiness. There's 2 versions of that movie, and if you think back at the Mormon Pavilion, which the church did back in, I believe it was 1963 in New York City, they actually still at that time were selling copies of the Book of Mormon, because back in the 1960s, remember, the church was in such financial stress at the time that they were still selling copies of the Book of Mormon. And remember, the original Book of Mormon was supposed to be sold for $1 or $1.25 in order that Martin Harris, remember, he mortgaged his farm for $3,000. They made 5,000 copies of the Book of Mormon, and he was supposed to make a handsome profit. And they ended up just giving it away because Joseph Smith didn't care if Martin Harris lost his farm or not. And of course, Martin Harris did lose his farm. So anyway, that's all a tangent. But the idea is the church has only been recently in the last 50 years giving away copies of the Book of Mormon once the church had enough money that they didn't need to sell them anymore.
Yeah. And the other concern, I think, is with that many copies of the Book of Mormon out there, that many versions. I mean, they have made some changes, right? You got to imagine there are millions and millions of Book of Mormons out there right now that still say the principal ancestors are the Native Americans, right? There are things that they had to tweak, things they had to change, and they still exist out there now.
Well, there's also that YouTube channel talks about the different editions of the Book of Mormon. If you've ever watched that one. Yeah. So, I mean, because we have the Community of Christ, we also have independent printings of the Book of Mormon. It's not just the Brighamite version of the Book of Mormon. I guess this is supposed to be counting all of them in totality, because they have different pagnations, they have different verses, they have different, not all of them have made the Joseph Smith edits, not all of them have changed the headlines. There's a lot of different versions of the Book of Mormon out there. And I think we can think like the Marriott Corporation for like half of this 200 million. Is that be about accurate?
Yep, it's in every desk drawer in every Marriott hotel. So are you saying that this number 200 million does include all of those other versions from other branches?
That's what I'm wondering, is does it include all of, I mean,
don't
because the FLDS, I mean, they publish a Book of Mormon too. Does this include all of those? I'm not really sure if it's just the Brighamite branch's particular version of it. I'm not sure about that. I did find it interesting from the particular article that the church released. There was a quote here from scholar David Buckavoy that said, quote, "You don't have to believe in the historic claims of the Book of Mormon to appreciate it as literature," end quote. So even the church, and that's from the church's official article, the church is sneaking it in there. They're putting it in there saying, hey, don't worry. If you have read that the Book of Mormon is not historical, you can still find value in it as beautiful literature and as something that is going to bring you close to God. So it's a tacit admission here by the church that the historic claims of the Book of Mormon can be in doubt.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I just did an episode on Mormonish with the wonderful Dr. John Lund Wall, and the title is "The Book of Mormon Must Be Historical or Everything Crumbles." Certainly you can read it, for some of the feel-good feelings that you would get from any other piece of literature. But in order for the church to stand, and it's a really interesting episode, it must be historical.
Yeah, actually, we're going to have him on the Mormon News Roundup too. I'm always on your coattails, Rebecca. What can I tell you? But
no, he's awesome. He's amazing.
I mean,
and he makes some key points there. So
yeah. I mean, the basic argument is if the Book of Mormon is not historical, then there was no Moroni. And without Moroni, then how do we have Moroni visiting Joseph Smith? Moroni then lied to Joseph Smith and said, here's a record of all these inhabitants of the ancient America. It makes no sense. Without Moroni, who is also named Nephi, then we don't have a credible origin foundation of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, because the first vision was retrofitted back in. The original story of the Book of Mormon is Moroni. If there's no Moroni, then what is this all about? That's the entire problem. But just real quick here, I do have a picture of President Nielsen touring the Book of Mormon factory here for you. And this is inspecting the Book of Mormon distribution. 200 million copies, sir, ready with 100 million more on the way.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, he's going to be hitting the print button. I don't think he's going to be slowing down on these. The more Book of Mormons that they crank out, copies of the Book of Mormon, I think that President Nelson, again, those legacy pieces, that's a lot of copies of the Book of Mormon, you know,
It's
not,
a
not to mention
lot.
digitally.
Yeah, I think that's right. I just actually watched this movie. Isn't that funny? I just watched this episode of Star Wars, so I recognize this exactly. That's really funny.
Yeah, that's right. You got the Trexmo, I got the Star Trek. We got
Yeah,
the
it's all
sci-fi
good.
covered here.
That's
Now that
right.
brings us
Mormons
to
and
our
sci-fi.
final piece for this year is the New Year's resolutions. We covered the top 10 Mormon stories for last year, but we also need to talk about, it's that time of the year for New Year's resolutions. And one of my resolutions, by the way, was to try to get a better studio for myself. Rebecca, how do I look?
Oh, you look amazing. You look incredible. Yeah,
Yeah, I
look at
had my
that.
wife help me decorate this. I
Yeah,
told her,
it looks really good.
as they say, you can't put lipstick on a pig, though.
Yeah.
So we got to keep things in perspective.
Are
But
you
yeah,
familiar with the Brody Awards that go out in the Yeah, so, I was thinking, "Oh, Mormonish might be nominated for some." We've had some really good episodes, especially with Dr. John Lundwall. I've been keeping an eye on the nominations. The only one I've seen for Mormonish is they said cutest studio. So there it is. But now I feel like we have competition because your studio is also very cute.
well, actually, the guy who runs the Brody Awards is Enos Envy, and we actually had him on the Mormon News Roundup. So I guess I keep trying to flex on you, Rebecca,
Yeah,
but
well,
it's
no,
not
there it
working.
is.
It's not working. That's the problem.
Well, no, now if you're connected to the person making the decisions, now you've swept that category. Dang it. I'm
well,
gonna have to add some more flowers or some more something.
I didn't get myself nominated for anything, so what can I tell you? It didn't do any good. But a lot of people are postulating what the New Year's resolutions should be for the LDS Church, and I came across a couple of different ones. We're running a little short on time, so I'm just going to share one with you, and then we're going to do the Mormon News Roundup poll of the week, which is where we'll go over some suggested New Year's resolutions for the LDS Church as well. So let me just get your thoughts on Stacker here, who he runs a very popular X account here, and this is what he said his New Year's resolutions for the church would be. Let me get your thoughts on them. Number one, if I were the prophet of the LDS Church, here's what I do: hire a nutritionist to revamp the word of wisdom.
Yep,
That
it
seems fine.
definitely needs some help. It's a little outdated, and it was originally based on kind of the junk pseudoscience of the day anyway. So yes, because I'm
Yeah.
sorry, green tea is the best thing in the world. I can't start the morning without it.
Or give women the priesthood, make a couple of women apostles using Junia as an example, and claim its ongoing revelation, restoration of all things. That's the apostle there, or the disciple in the New Testament, Junia. What do you think about that number
Oh,
two
yeah.
resolution?
Or Thecla and Paul. Oh my gosh. Have you ever read about Thecla? She's badass. Yeah. No, that's one that, I mean, I have a lot of opinions on that one. That would take a whole show, but there's a lot of avenues that they could take to make that happen. I know they're trying to make teeny tiny steps, like letting girls now pass the sacrament into the mother's room at church so that those deacons don't have to, see something that they might not understand. So yeah, baby steps and window dressing, but there are ways to accomplish this pretty easily. So we'll see.
Or how about make Bushman the historian? That's Richard Bushman.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. A historian is a lawyer, so I'm not sure how that would work.
Yeah,
But
our current church historian, quote unquote historian, is actually a lawyer and not a trained historian, whereas
right,
Richard Bushman is. Or apologize for hiding history. Let me just run you through a couple of these other ones here. Apologize and repent for past racism and polygamy,
yeah,
or change tithing to only 10% of your increase. That's like your surplus as it originally
exactly.
was, and make it optional for temple recommend attendance.
Yep.
Make Dan McClellan an apostle. Whoa.
Oh,
Hey.
I would
That
be on board with that.
Yeah, I think everybody would. Give any family members, regardless of standing in the church, ability to view marriage sealings in person.
Yes,
Hire,
that would be
yeah,
my number one right there.
yeah. Hire church janitors to clean the churches again.
Yep.
Give an immediate $10 billion to charity, and reevaluate all investment money and roll out an entirely new way of using that money for the poor. I like the Stacker guy.
Yeah, no,
He's
I
got
do
some
too.
good
And these
ideas.
changes, all of them would be not that complex. A lot of them
Doable.
could happen pretty quickly.
Yeah, doable.
Yes,
Simple
doable.
stuff. Repent for past abuse from leaders and roll out new policies on abuse and background checks on leaders.
Yeah.
Solid. Repent for past excommunications of historians who are kicked out for telling the truth. What else did I miss? This seems like a pretty solid list here,
Yeah.
Rebecca.
No, it isn't. It's very telling because if you read the list The other way around, these are things they haven't done and probably won't do. That could
Yeah,
make a huge difference to people, families, lives, but they're not going to.
well, we can always try, I suppose. That's what do they say? The only thing that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do
That's right.
nothing. So I guess we can
Yeah.
give it a college try here, which does bring us to our Mormon News Roundup poll of the week. What is the Mormon News Roundup poll of the week this time, Rebecca?
It looks like it's the top 10 New Year's resolutions for the LDS Church.
Yes, this is for January 7th, 2024. And we release new episodes of the Mormon News Roundup every Sunday night at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we also release episodes of the Mormon Movie Reviews every Monday night at 9:30 p.m. And so if you would be the first person to take our poll, I'd appreciate it. Rebecca, and what's your choice number one?
Oh, let's do it. Number 1 is condemn the radical right does not movement. That's important.
It's about time.
Yeah, I think so too.
Pretty simple to just take a strong stance on the Desnat movement, which does absolutely no good for society or the church, and to rein them back in. It's time to, instead of saying stand back and stand by, it's time to condemn this very harmful right-wing movement. Or how about number two?
Let's see. Overhaul the current bishop's hotline with which cover up sex abuse in favor of new sex abuse survivor centered resource hotline. Yes, I mean the hotline has been in the hot seat in the news for months and months and months. Everybody knows what it is. Everybody knows it's completely ineffective and does so much harm. It's time to completely change that and all the procedures surrounding it to protect victims.
Yeah, we need a victim-centered hotline, not a bishop cover-up hotline. And it's a complete 180 in what needs to happen in this situation. That could be New Year's resolution number two, or how
Yep.
about number three?
Number 3, implement immediate external auditing of church finances. Yes,
Yeah, just like
absolutely.
the community of Christ externally audits
Mhm.
all of its finances every single year, and then complete line item down to how much they pay for Wi-Fi for all of their chapels, how much they pay for the maintenance of the lawn mowing, all the way down. You can have complete confidence when you give a donation to the community of Christ. You can have absolute confidence that your donation is not being squandered or parked in an investment fund to rot until the second coming. And if the church implemented immediate external auditing, you could have that same degree of confidence.
Yeah, I think so too. And I've said before, when I visited other Christian churches and they have their slideshow at the beginning of the meetings, always their finances are right there. What's happened in the last month? Transparency. It's very important.
You betcha. Or how about number four?
Oh, give away 10% of EPA on true charity.
Yeah, and that's what actually Stacker had that as well. Every single year, you can give away 10% of Ensign Peak, and it will eventually go down to a level that is much more reasonable than where it's at now. And that's David Nielsen, by the way, on the left, our whistleblower, and Roger Clark, the former head of Ensign Peak from 1997 to 2019. I think it's about time we start upping the charity to a significant degree. And that would be an approximate giveaway of approximately, instead of $200 million per year, that would be approximately $15 billion per year, a significant increase.
That's a big increase, but I believe it was Roger Clark that said, nope, this will not happen. This money is for Jesus and the second coming. And we don't know the bottomless pit of how much money Jesus needs at this point. It's a lot.
It's amazing how much he seems to need now, when at the time that he was alive, it was reported that he said to give everything away and take no thought for the morrow. So it's an incredibly convoluted
Well, when you get
message.
closer to retirement, you realize you need more money. So I think maybe that's
He was
it.
only 30 at the time, right?
But
Okay.
he was only 30. He was a baby. Yeah.
I gotcha. Okay. Number five.
Oh, background checks on every LDS leader who will be working with children. They've been able to accomplish this in the UK, or at least make huge strides. This would be one that would be really important.
Yeah, and they've been able to accomplish it in the particular states in the United States that require the church to implement background checks. They just don't do it where they're not required. Simple stroke of the pen, an executive order by President Nelson or anyone else, and we could see a vast decrease in the number of sexual assaults perpetrated on children in LDS congregations. Seems like a solid resolution. How about number six?
Number 6 is publish the weekly ward attendance number by country, by congregation.
Yeah, that reminds me, you did that episode with Randy Bell about the church numbers and cooking the books, right?
Yeah, and also Simon Southerton, we talked about church numbers too, because they will not put out information, but there are very smart people who have found workarounds. And with what the information that they do put out, they are able to sort of crunch the numbers and figure out where it's at. But at some point, yes, please publish these actual numbers. I don't think it'll happen, but we can hope.
Yeah, I was actually texting Randy Bell about that this week. Boy, I am dropping so many names this week. I'm
Yeah,
starting
you
to
are
my ego is really out of control this week. What can I tell what can I tell you about it? I was texting Randy Bell about those numbers, and if we could
Yeah.
get those released, that would just be tremendous in helping us understand what's happening with the church. Number 7.
Stop shaming and demonizing members of the LGBTQ community. Full stop. Yes.
Yeah, I
What more
mean,
do we have to say?
yeah, it's absolutely full stop. And by the way, that does remind me, Rebecca, you have those glasses on the top of your head. I've never actually seen you use them. Are they just for show, or are they?
No, okay. So I wear contacts and I do
Oh,
have reading glasses, but my screen is so small that even putting these on doesn't really help at all.
oh,
I
okay.
don't know if any one of your viewers or listeners have a workaround for my small screen and my trying to, because I have contacts and glasses. What more can I do?
Okay, gotcha. I just wanted to see. I'd never actually seen those glasses put to use, but yes.
Yeah, you saw it here for the first time on News Roundup. Let's do it again. Yes, they do work, but my screen is still too small. Yeah, see? There we go. I wear them because I'm a librarian. I was a BYU librarian for years and years and years, and they're just kind of, isn't that what a stereotypical librarian wears?
Yeah, I wouldn't know. I imagine so, Madam Librarian for sure. Okay, number 8, New Year's resolutions for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Number 8, stop pretending to know things are true that you can't possibly know are true.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of that quote from Neil deGrasse Tyson: "Pretending to know everything closes the door to finding out what's really there." And it
So
also
good.
kind of reminds me of one of my favorite ex-Mormons who's not very active in the ex-Mormon community. His name's Aaron Ra, but he's a kind of
Yep.
a famous atheist. So he doesn't
Yep.
really he's mostly in the atheist community. He's not really in the Mormon community much, but he says that it's a lie to pretend to know things that you can't possibly know. It's not just that you're misinformed or that you're deluded, but if you pretend to know things that you don't know, that it's actually a lie. And so one of the suggestions for this poll is, just stop pretending to do that.
Right.
That might be a good resolution number. Or how about number 9?
Number 9, never again ask someone to make a donation to the church in lieu of feeding their starving children. Yes, please.
There's a number of we could spend an entire episode
Yeah.
on this, but I guess one of the most viral one was from Lynn Robbins, who said one of the first things a bishop must do to help the needy is ask them to pay their tithing. Like the widow, if a destitute family is faced with the decision of paying their tithing or eating, they should pay their tithing, end quote. So these harmful mindsets and messages should be repudiated and then never repeated again. Or number 10.
Link to the Mormon News Roundup Patreon and Mormonish podcast on the LDS Church's main webpage. I love that idea. Yes, let's make that happen.
I like where we're going with this one. That does take us to our poll here. And if you're in the live chat, go ahead and cast your vote. What do you think the LDS Church should do as far as New Year's resolutions are concerned? And Rebecca, if you could be the first person to take our poll, I'd be very grateful for that.
Yeah, this is very difficult because I think every single number, 1 through 10, is something that needs to happen immediately. But I feel like maybe one of the overarching ones, if you just stop pretending to know things that you don't know, it would almost wipe out almost all of the other ones if you really think it through. So I think I'll vote for that one. But every single one is incredibly important.
Okay, you're voting for number 8. Stop
Yes.
pretending to know things are true that you can't possibly know are true.
Yes.
That is a tall order, which is why I am personally going with number 5, which is just so much easier than number 8. I understand number 8, it could be of a great deal of importance, but background check only costs $20. That seems like the super simplest solution for this particular poll. Those of you out in the live chat, thanks for voting. Really appreciate that. That has taken us to our final segment here, Rebecca, which is the Mormon News Roundup Joke of the Week.
Ooh, the joke of the week. We usually start that at the beginning, don't we? But I do have the joke of the week. A Catholic priest goes into a barber shop and is given a haircut. And when he goes to pay, the barber says, no, you're doing the work of the Lord. This is free. And so the next morning when the barber comes into his shop, on the doorstep is an amazing gift basket from that Catholic priest. And he's so happy. So the next week, a Jewish rabbi comes into his shop for a haircut. The barber gives him a haircut. When the Jewish rabbi tries to pay, the barber says, no, you are a man of the cloth. You are doing God's work. This is free. I'm donating this to your cause. And the next morning, when the barber comes into his shop, on the doorstep, there's an amazing gift basket from the Jewish rabbi to thank him. So the next week, 2 Mormon missionaries come into his barber shop and get a haircut. When they go to pay, the barber says, no, 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 you're doing God's work. I'm more than happy to donate this haircut. And the next morning, when he comes to his shop, there are 12 more Mormon missionaries waiting on the doorstep.
Naturally. I can relate to that very much because we did have a couple of members who would give free haircuts. And once they start that train going, they really do it. My wife actually has given a lot of the Mormon missionaries around here haircuts as well. And it's kind of funny because once you give the haircut, then the lure is kind of with you. But then if you don't give one for a couple of weeks, then they kind of forget about it and you kind of have to restart it with them. So
You have to restart. Yeah. And they check you all the time on your hair. As I said, I have a missionary out and he's always like, Mom, I have to get another haircut. His hair is already like a micro level, but yeah, they definitely keep you in check with your appearance.
We're closing things out here. You're the host of the Mormonish podcast. What can we expect to see from you in the Mormonish podcast, the Good Book Club, and the Mormon Stories Book Club? What projects do you have coming up?
So much going on. So next week is our The Good Book Club monthly meeting, and we have a book that's called The God Virus by Dr. Del Rey. That is going to be amazing. If you'd like to Zoom in with us, you can find more information on Facebook. Just look up The Good Book Club, and it's at 11 a.m. on Sunday, the 14th. On Mormonish Podcast, we have a couple there you go. Thank you so much. This book, if you've not read this book, we're going to have Dr. Ray on Mormonish to talk a little bit more about this. We have some really exciting episodes and guests on Mormonish coming up. We're going to have Natasha Helper Parker talking about the bishop and his revelation from the stand on what it is that a bishop might be morally opposed to doing. We have that coming up. In the Mormon Stories Book Club, which I helped John DeLynn run, we are reading Uncultured by Daniela Young, a book about escaping the Children of God cults. So this will be coming up later if you want to grab a copy of this book and read with us. You can find information on all this on Mormonish Podcast website, Facebook page, The Good Book Club, and the Mormon Stories Book Club. So what else are you up to?
That's the first time anybody's ever asked me that.
I know. I felt like I had to throw it back at you because you have your movie channel that I have to say, if you guys have not checked this out, these things are really good. I hope you will all take a look.
That's so funny because I think I've done 101 episodes and not one person has ever asked me what it is.
Well, I'm throwing it right back at you because we're co-hosts here. So, and I also want everybody to know about your movie channel that you've started releasing on Monday nights because it's amazing. My favorite movie, Never a Bride. I'm telling you, this is amazing.
This is such a fun movie. It is absolutely a gem. And we have a good time reviewing it. We're going to be watching it in real time, giving some insightful and occasionally irreverent commentary. And we're going to be that's going to take place tomorrow night at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I want to thank you so much, Rebecca, for ruminating with me on the great and spacious Beehive. And I want to give a shout out to Weird Alma for this episode's music. And I remember.
No unhallowed hand. You're going to have to put up the graphic. Nobody can remember this.
I'll just try it one more time. It's all good. It's all good.
All right.
So I want to give a shout out to Weird Alma on bandcamp.com for this episode's music. And thank you so much, Rebecca, for ruminating with me on the great and spacious Beehive. And remember,
no unhallowed hand can stop this podcast from progressing.
When it comes to nicknames of the church, such as LDS Church, the Mormon Church, to remove the Lord's name from the Lord's church is a major victory for Satan.
Satan.